All right, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. And as per normal, going to go ahead and start out with the news for the week of September 11th. So there was a study, it's called the North American Solar Scan, and it's put together by a company called Zeltview. And Zeltview analyzed, they have data from about 90% of all of the large solar arrays. So any solar array that's larger than 1 megawatt the data is in here. And they issue ratings from AAA to triple D. So the AAA is the AAA, basically associated with power loss. So how is it rated based on power loss? How is it rated based on the module condition in the array? And what's the cell temperature? Of course, the cell temperature is going to give an indication if there's an issue, if there's a problem happening, with hot cells, bad panels, or bad connections. All right, so the results of this were that essentially the large solar arrays in the US are in pretty good shape. You would anticipate that since they're relatively new, but they said 51% are good or excellent, meaning they received a rating of triple B or better. The larger systems tended to do better, those systems over 100 megawatts, and those with tracking systems did better. My assumption is those larger systems and the tracking ones essentially receive a lot more maintenance, so they're kept up a little bit better. A new study shows that wind, the installation of utility scale wind, is down 45% quarter over quarter. So the first 2 quarters of 2023 compared with the first 2 quarters of 2022. Now, that on top of the fact that solar is projected to increase by about 52% over the coming year. So we've seen a decline in wind, increase in solar, but it's not like one technology is winning out on the other, because a lot of the solar decrease or the wind decrease in the last year due to a number of factors. One is supply chain issues. So we've all industries have been dealing with that. And with wind, that goes to other commodity prices, metals, aluminum, things like that. So there have been higher prices for those, and then regulatory delays. So we've touched on that in past sessions here about how the interconnection delays are just driving everybody crazy. When we look into the pipeline for upcoming wind projects, there are currently almost 80,000 megawatts of wind in the pipeline. So this compares with, so far in the first half of this year, they've installed about 2,800. So when you compare 80,000, let's say it's double. So we're looking at about 5,000 in a typical year. Over the next 5 years, we're going to see a massive increase in wind installations, hopefully, assuming all the regulatory and supply chain issues get worked out. The 17th annual electric report, which is put together by a consulting company called Black & Veatch, they found that there are growing problems with the grid. Many of these problems are due to weather-related climate change issues. The weather events and wildfires are causing grid outages. Also, the adoption of electric vehicles into the grid is starting to put strain on the infrastructure. And one that you might not expect is cyber threats. Cyber threats are a big issue within the electrical grid. So now this study's put together where they put together, they poll 650 grid stakeholders. So I'm assuming these are utility people, large contractors, developers, things of that nature. So when they looked at that, essentially for the first time, the top threat to the grid that has been listed is the integration of distributed energy systems. So about a third of the people who were interviewed said that's their number one concern. The second place is aging infrastructure. And then 56% worry about ransomware. So ransomware being a big issue as part of the cyber threat on the grid. Moody's has warned that utilities are racing to install solar and wind, renewable energy systems. And Moody's is concerned that this is going to lead to an oversupply of renewable energy, which will lead to price volatility. So a few years ago, we saw that wind and solar actually became the lowest cost energy source, far below coal, natural gas. So right now we're seeing this chart shows in 2021, the levelized cost is about 3.6 cents per kilowatt hour versus, $36 per megawatt hour. For solar, 38 for wind, 60 for natural gas, and 108 for coal. So given that kind of price volatility, we've seen that the utilities are price comparison, I should say, that they're really looking towards renewables when they look to replace their infrastructure they're generating. But because of the variable nature of wind and solar, they tend to overbuild capacity because they're concerned about availability. And batteries, which are seen as a solution to this, storing when it's available, using when it's not, have not kept pace. So we're seeing a overbuilding of infrastructure. That always seems to be the case. However, Moody's did warn that this is not just for a renewable issue. We've seen the same kind of price volatility with fossil fuels in Texas, for example, because they're very reliant on natural gas. And when they've had these weather emergencies down there, we've seen price spikes of natural gas, pretty dramatic price spikes. So they're worried the same thing's going to happen where prices fall, then, when renewables are available, prices surge when they're not. So that's something to look out for. And speaking of utility scale solar, SolarEdge has announced a new product line that's trying to push them into the world of commercial, or not commercial solar, but utility scale solar. So their system, as they're envisioning it, is really designed for community solar systems, agrivoltaics, and small and mid-sized ground-mounted utility systems. They've got a 330 kilowatt inverter that works with 1,300 watt optimizers. And as this diagram shows, they've got, utility scale storage. They're looking at, the various tracking devices and weather monitoring and data and all of the other good things. Now, they are claiming that this inverter is 99% efficient. So that's pretty much the news from the solar industry for this week. Does anybody have anything they want to add to that at the moment? Something that I may have missed? Give you just a second. Okay, well, I'm going to jump into the events of the week then. So the events of the week, this week, we're looking at, well, these aren't all this week, but they're upcoming webinars, sessions, things like that. On the 21st, which is on Thursday at 12 noon, there will be a webinar on the EV infrastructure issues. It's a panel discussion that's coming up. It's put on by, I think it's Clean Energy, or not Clean Energy Ohio, but Clean Vehicles. On the 21st, also at 2 p.m., Solar Power World's putting on a thing about streamlined processes. They're talking about automation within your PV systems. Same time, September 21st at 2, IREC is putting on a discussion about clean energy workforce. That's something you may or may not want to participate in. That's more of an interactive discussion for people who are involved in education primarily. Then we've got on September 27th at 11:30, there's a webinar on energy storage, modular battery systems. I think this is primarily for utility scale. I don't think it's residential or commercial, but you can check that out. And the 28th, 2 p.m., one on high efficient string inverters. Again, this is for larger systems. So that's a webinar that's going to be out there. And then on October 3rd, 2 p.m., these are all Eastern time. zone. Evervolt home battery systems. So if you're curious about what that product's all about, they're having a webinar on that. And October 12th, this one kind of piqued my interest a little bit. Generative AI for renewable energy. So we're going to be hearing stories, if you haven't already, about how artificial intelligence is going to be integrating into everything, and solar is not going to be any exception when it comes to this. So that will be interesting to see what's on the horizon from our robotic overlords coming up in the next few decades. And then, of course, we have courses that are available from solarpvtraining.com. So if you're so inclined, go visit there and see what kind of courses we got that are upcoming. And that's my shameless plug for the week. So, all right, once again, I'll give you an opportunity if you've got anything here to add to our list of events, or if something else popped up, or a question that you might have that you've run across during the week that we can see if we can get some of the group wisdom to answer. Anybody have any input or feedback at that point? Now that we have more and more people online, everybody gets a little shy, but don't be shy. Okay, so I'm going to jump in. I thought what the topic that we would touch on here this week is really talking about SolarEdge, because I've been talking a bit about Enphase a couple of times in recent weeks. So I thought I'd give their major competitor a little bit of equal time. So it's really what's happening at SolarEdge, and I wanted to do an exploration about what kind of products that they're pushing, where are they going with all of this. Perhaps some of you have experience with SolarEdge, and that would be helpful if you could chime in either from an installation or you've had that system installed at your place to see if you've had any issues with it. Looks like right away solar array. Okay, I'll see about that. I see some chat going on there, and it's hard for me to see then read the chat and still talk. Can't multitask it that way. So so if you could pop in and just interrupt me if you've got a question or an observation, that'd be helpful. All right, so SolarEdge and Enphase really continue to dominate the residential marketplace, not just in the United States, but internationally as well. I've seen a lot of articles that basically say they control about 90% between those two companies of the residential marketplace worldwide. So when we look at here, this is US data, and it ends in 2021, but it shows that Enphase, and I do have some more recent data. Enphase for the first quarter here, I'm looking through my sheets of paper. It represents 48% currently of the inverter marketplace. SolarEdge represents about 40%. And so it's that, to my reckoning, is 88%. So the other 12% is split between everybody else. Now, SunPower and Hoy Miles shows up here on this diagram. And I believe Hoy Miles is a microinverter company, if I'm not mistaken. SunPower, not 100% sure. I think it's probably a string inverter system. Not sure. And when I was looking at the market value of these companies, these have become very large companies. Enphase, the bigger of the two, is a US based company, and it's basically looks to me to be about $500 million in market value. $533 million. This is as of April of last year. SolarEdge, which is an Israeli-based company, is $325 million of market value. So considered to be pretty large companies there. One of the reasons, I guess, if I back up here real quick, you'll see that SolarEdge used to be dominant. used to be very dominant compared to Enphase, and Enphase continually whittles into that that dominance to where now Enphase is actually a bigger player in the field in the residential market than is SolarEdge. Part of the reason for this, there are several reasons, but one, and the main one, is that they've had some quality issues. And if you Google them, if you look through about SolarEdge quality or SolarEdge faults, you're going to find a lot of discussion in all of the Reddit groups and the online blogs and the industry press. I couldn't find anything that said this problem is over. It may well be, but these things tend to hang on. The reputation hangs on for sure. Part of the issue there is that SolarEdge doesn't manufacture any of their own products. They sub it out, and they've subbed these things out primarily China, Hungary, and Romania, and apparently they've had some real issues with faulty equipment. Now, these are warranted, and the failures tend to happen pretty early on. I think they call them infant failures, I think is typically the term that they use. And this is where they crash and die very quickly after you've installed them. But it's a pain. It's a pain to have to, okay, I see, infant mortality. So it's a pain that you have to go out and replace the optimizer or replace the string inverter. I know Chris Cook, who's on these calls periodically, he had to install or reinstall 3 of the inverter systems because they kept failing. So has anybody on the call here dealt with that, with the unreliability of SolarEdge at all? And you'll have to unmute yourself if you're so inclined to speak. Okay. All right, so that's been a continuing issue, and I think that's going to be a reputation that they're going to have trouble overcoming. Little bit of background, SolarEdge was established in 2006 and is, as I mentioned, an Israeli-based company. I think they're beginning to open up, like everybody else, manufacturing facilities here in the United States to take advantage of the 10% investment tax credit that comes from the Inflation Reduction Act. I know Enphase is opening up some plants. They've had some recent announcements in the press. I thought it was funny when I installed my first Enphase system and the box of microinverters arrived, and on the side it says in really big letters, proudly designed in the United States. And then in really tiny letters underneath it said, assembled in Mexico. So I thought that was cute. So they're always a little bit ashamed of that. But now they're starting to actually have to do the assembly here in the US to qualify for that tax credit. All right, so what does a SolarEdge system look like for those of you who are not familiar with, excuse me, with the overall system? I guess as a little bit of background, the concept of microinverters came around when before, but it really came into the forefront when the rapid shutdown provision of the National Electrical Code came into play, where they said, okay, we need you to shut off the power at the panel. And the industry was kind of flummoxed as to how exactly to do that, because the wire going from the panel to the inverter was still live during sunlight. So if you had a large commercial system, you could just move the inverter right up next to the solar array, and then you didn't have that as an issue. But then somebody came up with the idea of saying, why don't we make lots of little inverters, attach them directly to the panel? That takes care of that problem. It then allows us to deal with MPPT tracking, the maximum power point tracking, so we can control each of the panels individually at the module level. And then we could monitor and control them because we can put the communication. And so they started adding all of this. So each panel becomes its own little array. Well, then SolarEdge came out and said, you know what? There's no need to put all of that functionality up there at the panel. All you need to do is, well, let's put all of it except for the inverter. So that became what's known as power optimizer. So the SolarEdge system has a power optimizer. It's a module level power electronic device, gets attached to each of the panels. It then flows down to a centralized fixed voltage inverter, and it's converted from DC to AC. If you integrate in a battery, there's an advantage because this becomes a DC coupled system. So batteries operate at DC, solar panels operate at DC, so we can charge directly the batteries without having to go through multiple inversion and conversion processes. So that became a marketing edge. Then they also found, okay, well, if shading's not really an issue, you can hook up multiple panels to a single optimizer. So that became a cost-saving issue. And now they're integrating in battery EV charging, sorry, not battery, but electric vehicle charging into their system. We'll touch on that a little bit later. And then you've got, of course, got they've got a water heater, which is effectively just a load dump. So we'll touch on that as well. So this is what they envision your home system as. Ultimately, it is a DC coupled system if you put battery storage into it, but it's their go-to. Their main thing is the optimizers on the panels, and then a fixed string voltage, a fixed voltage string inverter that they're hooking up to. And the string inverter, because it's not doing all the other things that typical string inverters do, can be priced a little bit less than a typical string inverter. All right, so if we look at each of the products individually, and again, I welcome you to interrupt me if I touch on something that you want more clarification on, because it's always nicer if it's a conversation rather than a monologue here. So the first thing is the optimizer. That's what one of those things look like. A little bit bigger than a typical cell phone, a little bit thicker. And then you hook the panel into those short leads there, the MC4 connectors, and then the longer leads connect together. So they just form a string. So each panel is hooked into the optimizer, and then the optimizers are strung together the same way you would hook up solar panels together if you didn't have those. And then the end phase, the SolarEdge inverters. These are fixed voltage inverters. Typically at the residential end, we're talking about single phase. So these are going to be, 240 volt single phase. But their product line, primarily, you see it's a 3,800 watt string inverter, and that's really designed for 100 amp service with a 100 amp service panel. So that can be load side connected to your service panel and not exceed the 120% rule when hooking into that circuit breaker panel. So that's why that's kind of an odd number, but it all just matches out with the 100 amp on a 100 amp service. Then there's a 5,700 amp or 5,700 watt inverter, a 6,000 watt inverter. There's a 7,600 watt inverter, and that again deals with 200 amp service and a 200 amp panel. And then a 10,000 watt and 11.4. So that's basically their fixed voltage string inverter lineup at the residential level. And you'll notice that little red button there is showing a 12 and 25 year. It comes with a 12-year warranty, and then you can pay them a little bit of extra money and extend the warranty to 25 years on those string inverters. Then there's battery backup here. So the battery system, and I believe now they've started marketing this as a SolarEdge battery, but I really think it's an LG Chem battery that they've just stuck their name on. And because it's a DC coupled system, this is a true battery, right? Yeah, I mean, all lithium ion batteries have some electronics that are part of it as part of the battery control system. But unlike like the Enphase system, because it's an AC coupled system, it has to incorporate inverters to convert from DC to AC and back from AC to DC. So that's more of a package unit. This is a more simple battery. And these are available. It shows two guys looking like this thing is very light, but it gives, I put the picture with the guys in it just to give you a sense of scale, but it's pretty heavy, as all these batteries are. And then we have a charging station. And at first I wondered, because it's not a bidirectional charging station yet. We're not there yet where your batteries and your or your EV is serving as your battery backup for your home. There are some proprietary solutions like the Ford Lightning that will do that, but this is not that. What this is doing is hooking the EV charging station into the inverter. And the reason why that has an advantage, at least according to them in their marketing material, is, I mean, they claim a 25% faster charge, which I would tend to discount. But it really is about smart scheduling, because we're starting to see the utilities really punish you for feeding energy back onto the grid. So you're getting paid wholesale rates and getting charged retail rates when you buy from them. And so you really want to try and self-consume as much as you can. So what this is doing is, because it's incorporated into your inverter, it can see when you're generating more power than you're using. And rather than redirect that power to the grid, it's going to charge. And it's only going to charge when you have available power from your solar array, and within reason. I mean, all of these things are programmable. So you can take that excess solar energy, and then instead of feeding it back to the grid for retail or for wholesale, and then buying retail to charge your car, you're going to direct it to your car. So your car becomes a load dump, basically. So that's a nice thing, a nice feature, and a real legitimate reason why you would incorporate that into your inverter. And then there are a few other smart devices that are out there as part of this system. I mentioned another load dump here is the hot water controller. So it's once again saying, hey, instead of sending power back to the grid, use your system when you have excess energy to heat your hot water. This is a process that's been used in standalone systems a lot, where you use the hot water heater as a load dump. In this case, we're just saying, all right, why don't you just set it up so that during the day, use the excess energy, let it be directed to your hot water heater, not to the grid where it might or might not, you may be paying retail rates to heat your hot water otherwise. And then there's some backup interfaces, which is just essentially a transfer switch, an auto disconnect switch. Any grid connected system with battery backup has to have some way of disconnecting from the grid, when the grid goes down, so it can operate in a standalone mode. So that's a feature there. And then they have some load controllers where you can turn them on or off and prioritize them, as energy is available. And those are all wireless devices that could be hooked into your system. So you might say, all right, I'm going to turn these things on or off remotely, or prioritize them based on available energy, things like that. So, batteries don't last forever. So you might say, all right, after a few hours, I want to turn off some of these loads just so that I could serve my battery for the more important loads. So I'll throw it back out again. Anybody have any questions on some of the SolarEdge residential product line at the moment?
Hey Jay, this is Joe. Hey,
Yeah, hey Joe.
is the power that's coming from the grid, is that on AC power, AC connecting into the hot water tank?
Oh yeah, yeah. It would be an AC system. Typically, I mean, you have an electric hot water heater. So I don't know if this system requires you put in a second heating element or if it just connects into the existing heating element and controls it that way from the inverter. But yeah, I don't think you don't need a DC hot water heater. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, whether it was either coming out of the inverter as DC or AC going to the hot water tank. That's all.
Yeah, no, it would be going in as AC power.
Okay.
It's simply a controller. Yeah, okay. A question there: is the car charger or load dump compatible with other inverters? I don't think so. I think it's a proprietary solution. My guess is it would have to hook up to a SolarEdge inverter. Pretty sure on that. Any other questions there? Okay. If feel free to interrupt me as I'm moving forward. So what is the traditional argument by SolarEdge or any of the optimizer people, as to why it's preferable over a string inverter? And a traditional string inverter, if you have different strings facing different directions, that can be problematic. So this essentially, you're controlling it at the panel level as far as maximum power point. And it doesn't really care how much sunlight is hitting a specific panel because it adjusts the amps, but then holds your voltage fixed. I think, and I might be wrong on this, but I think it controls everything to 400 volts. So, if one panel is shaded, it would just be producing fewer amps than a panel that's in full sunlight, but both would be producing at 400 volts and they would feed into the string inverter. Whereas traditional inverters, you've got to balance the voltage. Otherwise, you can run into problems. And the same thing with a string inverter, where if one of the panels in the string is bad, it's going to throttle down production for the entire string. So if one panel is shaded, it affects all panels in the string. That's one of the real strong arguments for module level power electronics. And most string inverter systems now have module level power electronics that you can add to the system. And they can do any or all of the things that an optimizer does. And even, not a microinverter, they wouldn't do that. But essentially, the main things that an optimizer controls at the panel level is maximum power point. So you're getting the best production at each panel, given that panel's individual environment. So it deals with shading, it deals with whatever. It treats them all differently, so you're not getting the string impacted by all the panels in that string. You're allowed to communicate with each panel, so you can remotely watch to see what each panel is producing, and it'll give you a heads up if there's a problem with a panel. And also the rapid shutdown, so it'll turn off power at the panel itself. So communications, rapid shutdown, power optimization. Well, all three of those things, you can buy module level power electronics that do any or all of them for a typical string inverter. Maximum uptime, superior safety, all of that kind of thing. That's their own, plug there. And then the benefit compared with microinverters. And I should add, microinverters do all those things that the optimizers just said they do. They're arguing best of both worlds. Basically, they say, all right, microinverters cost significantly more than a comparable SolarEdge system. Well, that's true to an extent. I'll give you an example a little bit later on, but the larger the system, the more true it is. Smaller systems, less the case. Reliability, well, they're arguing that their system's more reliable, but in recent years hasn't really proven to be more reliability. And then, of course, complexity. Well, they're really kind of talking to the DC coupled systems versus AC coupled systems. So that's kind of where they're leading in there. So I think their argument falls flat when they talk about complexity and reliability, because they've had a history now of faulty product. And they're saying ours are more reliable, but they have not proven to be. In the early days of Enphase, the microinverters, the Enphase 185s, they had a reputation of failure. And that really hurt Enphase in the early days. But they've gone through a number of iterations. The 250s that came out, the M250s, were less prone to failure. And then you jump up to the IQ6s, the smart microinverters. Those really have had no history of substantial failure. Then you get into the 7s, the 8s now series that we're dealing with. And just reading in the industry, I don't see a lot of failure there, but I see a lot of failure with the SolarEdge stuff. All right, the commercial systems, this is another big area where Enphase, not Enphase, but SolarEdge excels, because now you're starting to get into substantially large systems. And microinverters are just kind of impractical. If you're talking about installing, 300 panels, 400 panels, having 400 microinverters, it's a lot of work, and all of the issues are going to be up there at the panel. So you're going to have to be doing all your maintenance on the roof or out in the field or whatever. So these larger commercial systems, this commercial system they're showing with 120 kilowatt inverters. So you can design a system that's, say, a 300 kW system, a large commercial system, and only put in 3 SolarEdge inverters and then run everything to strings. And it's just a lot simpler, lot better wire management and everything than an Enphase microinverter system with 300 microinverters. And the other thing to throw in here is that the optimizers, when you start looking at them, these optimizers that are in commercial systems are typically 1100 watt or 1200 watt optimizers, and they're designed to be connected to 2 different panels. So you're doing one optimizer for 2 panels. So you're cutting down on the number of electronics that are part of that system. Now, I think that's one reason why that other microinverter company, Hoynes, I forget the name. Anyway, but it has like quad microinverters where you can hook up 4 panels. Hoyne Miles? Okay, yes. Thanks. Yeah, so they're starting to cut in because they're really for larger systems, cutting down on the number of electronic devices. And then the inverters, of course, when you get into a commercial system, is going to be 3-phase. And here in the US, the smaller, the 10 kW, the 17.3 kW systems, and then they even also have a 50 kW system that's 120, 208 3-phase. But then you get into the bigger ones, 30, 40, 50, 80, not 50, but 30, 40, 80, 100, 110, 120. Those are 277 480s. So when you start getting into that, you're probably going to be having transformers on the site to kick down the voltage, perhaps to a 208 3-phase, and then of course you'd be feeding those into three-phase panels. And so that's a whole world of commercial installation that many of us are not necessarily all that involved with. but you know that it's happening. It's happening out there, and it's happening a lot. Okay, so then I thought I'd give you a little comparison here between prices, because they do claim that their products are cheaper. And so just to give you a sense of what these things cost, I pulled up a screen from Alti's website, their distributor. And you can see, I think these are some of the SolarEdge optimizers. There's a 500 watt optimizer, 440s, 485s. They're in the neighborhood of $115 a piece, in that range. So that's going to be your retail. And then if you wanted a fixed voltage inverter, there again, a couple of them here are 2,500 more or less. So just a quick back of the napkin analysis here. Let's say we had 20 panels. So we're looking at 20 optimizers and 20 and one string inverter. So I threw it, $2,300 for the optimizers if they're 115 a piece, the $2,400 inverter. So you're looking at $4,700 for those components. Now the panels, the racking, all of that, I'm assuming are going to be the same between SolarEdge and Enphase. But I just wanted to do a quick comparison on a relatively small system. So 20 panels there, $4,700 for that particular cost. When we look at the Enphase microinverters, they're in the neighborhood of around $200 now. You can get an IQ8 a little cheaper elsewhere, but let's just say $200 for that. One of the downsides of an Enphase system is the proprietary wire that you have to buy to make your parallel connections. But the prices of proprietary wire have come down substantially. So it used to be a real major expense. But so I'm putting in a number for my 20 panel system of $4,000 for the microinverters, $620 for the cable to connect them together. And then you're also going to need to have a combiner box, the Enphase combiner box. And that one here, the combiner box, is showing up at $729. So when I add those three things together, we're at $5,300 versus $4,700. So the pricing is comparable. A little cheaper for power optimizers for sure. But if you get a system that's 10 kW or less, you're probably going to be looking at comparable pricing. Now, when you start adding in batteries and all the other bells and whistles, yeah, the prices can change dramatically. But if you're just talking about a straight grid-tied system, trying to do apples to apples there, smaller the system, the more Enphase looks attractive. And there's a certain amount of flexibility that's I find attractive with Enphase that SolarEdge doesn't really offer. And it's important to also bear in mind, SolarEdge has a hard stop when it comes to adding to the system. The inverter has a fixed capacity. So, once you reach that capacity, then if you want to keep adding, you've got to buy a second inverter, and that's going to be another $2,500 investment. Whereas with Enphase, you can put one, forever. So it's more of a linear cost escalation as opposed to in steps like you would get with SolarEdge. Okay, so I think that's everything I've got. Just looking at what SolarEdge has available. Anybody have any questions before we call it a day? Yeah, Pete, you've got a question?
Okay, there I am.
Yep.
So it seems like the first offering that you presented at the start of the meeting was a 300 kW system, and they offered optimizers as well.
Yeah.
Now, surely a 300 kW system would be on an excellent site with minimum shading issues. So while we don't know exactly what those optimizers cost, what I saw in the Alt-E prices you showed a few minutes ago was that their an optimizer was half the price of a panel. So it's got to be a pretty seriously compromised site to benefit more from the optimizer than the optimizer costs versus just installing more panels, is where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, but I think what you're going to find, even at the community solar level, first off, the string inverter is going to be substantially cheaper than a comparable string inverter without the optimizers, because it doesn't have all of those bells and whistles. The maximum power point tracking is done at the inverter. The communication device is done at the inverter. So a traditional string inverter that you might buy from Fronius or one of the other manufacturers is going to cost more than a comparably sized string inverter from SolarEdge. Is it going to cost more than the optimizers plus the inverter? My guess is it's not. That SolarEdge is going to be a higher price solution when you get into that world. And so they're going to then argue, okay, we've got a whole bunch of other things that are adding value add, like you can now monitor your system at the module level. Rapid shutdown shouldn't be an issue for one of these because it's going to be a ground mounted system typically. So that's not an issue. So who knows? This may be why they haven't really ventured into the small utility scale marketplace before, because what do they have to offer that a other string inverter doesn't?
Right. And that's what we're seeing in Wisconsin here. The one site that I talked to, they just run the panels in series upwards of about 1200 volts, no optimizers or anything. And you get what you get, but their sites are pretty optimal because people want an optimal site.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And of course, the utility scale people are usually all about low cost. I mean, they're trying to get that price down below $1 a watt to install the system. So who knows? I mean, maybe a 330 watt kilowatt inverter is still a pretty small utility scale system, comparatively, because you're talking megawatts when you're out there in that world. So it could be they're more looking towards larger commercial systems. Maybe they're targeting agrivoltaics. That seems to be in their literature. So they may have identified a niche market that they're looking at, that they're trying to get into, like small utility scale.
Okay, I hope they're not providing a solution looking for a problem, because we see that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you know how committees work. So, Siggy, I see your hands raised there. You might be muted. I'm not hearing you, Siggy. I see you're not muted, but I'm not hearing your question. Okay, as he's trying to figure that out, anybody else have any questions? Doke, must have done a good job. All right, well, we're coming up on 10 minutes before the hour, so we'll call it a day. And I appreciate your attendance, and we'll see you all next week. All right, take care.